Can we please take a seat so that we can start the second session of the Time Use Week? I'd be grateful if you could just return to your seats, and that way we can start our session. So please, everybody, sit down. That way it'll be much more comfortable and more straightforward and more streamlined. We're right on time. We're doing very well for time, but we don't want to lag behind. So we will now begin the second meeting of the Catalan Network for the Right to Time, which was set up in order to bring together all Catalan organizations that have to do with time use. The purpose of the network is to create and disseminate knowledge on this matter. The network works towards healthier uses of time that also deploy more solidarity and are more sustainable. Only thus can we work towards a transition, a more environmental, feminist, green transition in our country. Without further ado, I'll give the floor to Saray Espejo Bonito, Director General for Care, Time Organization and Work Equity in the Government of Catalonia. You have the floor.
Gracias.
Thank you. I haven't been mic'd up because I'll just speak for a couple of minutes. My name is Saray Espejo. I'd like to greet and welcome everyone, the authorities at every level, civil society, companies. I'd like to welcome you all, and we hope this week will be a rewarding one for us all. Most of you don't know me because I only took this post a month ago. I'm a Director General in the Government of Catalonia, and I will be in charge, amongst other things, of use of time. I'm very pleased that you contacted me and my department to implement this international initiative that makes Barcelona, as it were, the center of the time use world this week. We all have an issue, very poor time management. I'm one of them. I'm one person involved. I didn't have the time to even print out the program or my speech because I only arrived from a trip yesterday evening. We're all embarked in this issue of work-life balance. We all need to live. Life cannot possibly just be about work. As you know, this is the second meeting of the network. Most of you have probably met in person. I haven't had a chance to greet everyone, so please do not hesitate to come over and introduce yourselves. The network was set up in 2022 in order to link up all organizations in Catalonia that have to do with time use. However, as you know, in the case of the Government of Catalonia, our department is part of the our section is part of the Department for Equality and Feminisms. So we look at time use from a feminist perspective. As you know, women are the most time poor because they invest much more time than men do in unremunerated tasks, including caregiving. And that's why our department is really paying attention to co-education on this matter during the current legislature, because we feel it's very important to start with the children. It is in childhood that we start promoting unequal distributions of time use, and so we hope we all agree on this renewed perspective, tackling the matter from a co-educational perspective. We have over 300 members, actually 304. That includes private bodies, research groups, local authorities. I see someone here from my university, business organizations, you name it. There's something that we can all be very proud of. there's quite a good balance here between the public sector and the private sector. As we all know, it is only by working hand in hand that we can move forward in better uses of time. And so we're very proud to state that this network is quite balanced in its distribution. What our network offers is facilitation for sharing experience within Catalonia, in some cases even outside of Catalonia, providing material, resources, and information. In the working plan for 2024, we've had meetings of the promoter group, we've taken part in symposia, also outside of the Time Use Week. We have implemented something we're very proud of, that we believe we can work on further in the future, the network of equality professionals. The government of Catalonia, particularly our department, wants to work hand in hand with local government. We know that citizens first address their local government, so it's very important for us to help local governments in their public policies, including time use policies. As you know, our Directorate General in the government of Catalonia can provide lots of resources and material that we've put together in order to help you all improve your time management and time use. This afternoon, some of you will be taking part in the plenary meeting of the time policies and time use group. So at that point, we will have the opportunity to hear from everybody. We hope to hear, especially from those of you whose ears are closest to the ground, to see what is working best, what can be best shared with other authorities, so we can try and expand the network as much as possible in the context of identifying best practices and best policies. The government of Catalonia believes that it's really important to have time use policies or public policies that are truly helpful for citizens and that are feminist, because that is the approach we take in the government of Catalonia. Without further ado, I'd like to recommend that everyone pays attention to the speakers speaking from a public authority perspective, including and also speakers from SECOT, because they're the ones who are actually implementing everything we're discussing here today. I hope we can all work together to rationalize our use of time as much as possible so that we all operate in the sphere of equality and liberty. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Espejo. As you have heard, a lot is being done already in order to improve our time use, in order to get rid of this feeling that we're not dealing with life properly. The time has come now to hear about good practices that have been developed to rationalize uses of time. Many organizations, many bodies have adhered to the Catalan network for the right to time. And this is being done on a public basis, on a private basis, and also within the third sector, as it is called. But I won't speak about this. I will be asking people to take the floor up here. So, Ms. Cristina Vargas Soria, 6th Deputy Mayor for Internal Services, Participation Policies, Equality and Commerce of Santa Coloma de Gramenet City Council. Please step up here. Thank you very much and welcome. We will also hear about good practices from Núria Ferrer y Cardona, Councillor for Social Rights, Citizenship and Health of the Amposta City Council. Thank you very much. Please take a seat. We will also hear from Pere Ejarque Guillamat, Head of Career Guidance and Job Placement at SECOT. Thank you very much. Please take a seat. And to close the circle from the third sector, we will hear from Julia Vigo, Head of Equality and Feminisms at the third social sector panel, as well as Marta Campo, Head of Strengthening Policies at the same panel or board. So we will hear from them. They are the ones who have the floor now to tell us about their good practices. Without further ado, I give the floor to Ms. Vargas Soria of Santa Coloma de Gramenet City Council, who will tell us about the SIVA monitoring service. Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everybody, and I'd like to thank the organization for inviting us to tell you about our project. I would like to set the context. Our town council promotes public feminist policies from CIBA, CIBA, which is a pioneering center that was set up to tackle all of our challenges in terms of feminism and equality. Aren't my slides being shown here? I was hoping to have my slides shown. Let's see. Here we have it. There. Yeah, so I was setting the context about CIBA, C-I-B-A. So, our city council set up this pioneering center with different strategic lines, including a space for participation, a space for families, co-education and co-responsibility, where the babysitting service is included. That's what I called the interpreter called the monitoring service earlier. It's babysitting. So we also have genealogy and historic memory, and also a space for tackling sexist violence. So what led us to set up the babysitting service? Well, the fact that women are still the ones mainly in charge of caregiving. And so we thought we would change our public policy paradigm, placing life and caregiving at the center. We also wanted to promote innovative approaches to make life more equal, and also to give social value to the care, the work of reproduction. And that is why Time for Care was set up. Temps per cures, Time for Care. As a result of all of this being brought together, in March of 2023, we set up Menuda SIVA, which is the name of our, for now, one-off babysitting service. It's for children age 0 to 16. This is a one-off care service. On the one hand, it's about providing caregiving for the general population on a one-off basis, so that family members can take time off their caregiving responsibilities to train or access other options. It's offered from 9 to 1 and from 4 to 8 p.m. It's caregiving or supervision of children aged 0 to 16. 16 is not that much of a baby anymore. But anyway, we have an admin worker, we have a coordinator, and we have caregivers. But in addition to their work, it's also very important to have a co-educational approach there.
So we offer after-school activities and combine it with other activities too, because we think that co-education for us is a key pillar in order to achieve a fairer and more equitable society. So we work with families, mothers, fathers, and the children themselves in order to via games, music, theatre, and so on. We try to work on co-responsibility of caring. So it's not always women that have to do it. And we also try to work on preventing gender violence and social and affectionate relationships. So I'll give you some figures here to see how our service has evolved in our city, Santa Coloma Gramenet. It's been very successful, I think. We started in March 2023, and we offered services to just over 200 families. And now we are reaching 500. So for us, it's a consolidated project. It's been very well assessed and valued by our citizens. We have freed up about 6,600 hours of families that were dedicated to care, so they can spend that time on other things. And now we see what they spend that time on. But on the age front, between 0 and 3 years, there's a lack of places in creche in the municipality, so we offer that service. And also there's a need for covering the after-school time slots. So this is a service that we offer our families. We take into account the profiles of the families, and normally the ones that come in to ask for resources are usually women that come to us. And that means that we still see an unequal distribution of the caregiving activities. So there's still a lot of prejudice, and there's things that cannot just be solved by offering babysitting to their children. And then very often we also find cases of women that have no support networks, single parent families, usually single mothers, and with financial difficulties. So once again, both time and financial poverty affects women in an exaggerated manner. That's what we have to try to avoid. And what do the people who free up their time dedicate this new time? Well, they usually work more. So we are offering women more hours to be able to take up more working hours, which is one of the strategies that we're working on. So everything has to do with a feminist economy. And we also carry out different actions in Thiva. And very often women say they can't participate in these activities because they don't have time, but we free up time so they can do that. And also so they can participate in other services. So to conclude, for us, the babysitting service has been really successful, but it has to come together with this co-educational perspective, working with families, because there's still many challenges. And taking care of others should not continue with a female face, but it should be the face of both men and women. So now let's take a look at another example. Now we're going to hear from Nuria Ferrer Cardona from the City Council of Amposta. She is responsible for social rights, citizenship, and health. Thank you very much. When I was asked to present here an example of good practices or good best practices, I had my doubts because it's quite a matter of common sense that we should have timetables that are good for everybody. But obviously that's not the situation. That's why I accepted to participate in this roundtable. Just to give you a bit of background, I'm from Amposta. I suppose everyone knows where Amposta is. But if you don't know Amposta, it's a town rather than a city. But sometimes we do have a kind of small village mentality sometimes. 23,000 inhabitants. Before, Sarai said that we all suffer from time issues, and I'd just like to stress that today for me to get here has been extremely difficult. So whenever we plan conferences, it's really hard to get here by 9 o'clock in the morning. Although I left at 6 this morning, I was not able to get here before 10 o'clock. So we really need to be able to change working hours and hours for conferences and other events. Thank you very much. But having said that, I really had to say it because it's really been a torture trying to get here. well, we, in our citizenship and social rights department, which includes social services and other services, we were offering services within a more limited time scheme, but we were asked to offer from 8 in the morning to 6 in the afternoon, which is, of course, quite a lot of hours, but that allows people who had to work were able to adjust their hours. And our staff would not just work the typical official timetables from 8 to 3, but offer a wider range of hours in which they could offer services to citizens. Now, with this change in our timetables, what we did was we allowed for an entry during the mornings at different times, so we can offer citizens their services throughout all these hours. But people turn up to work, adjusting to the common sense, the needs of the service, and other workers. So people can start in the morning at different times. There's more time flexibility. People can adapt the timetables to what works best for them, and it also allows them to achieve a better work-life balance. Another thing that we started doing since COVID is teleworking. So one morning a week, all of those who work in our department during the week spend one morning doing teleworking, focusing on the more administrative aspects of our work. And then when they are in our services and the SIAP or other services, what they do is they directly work with people there, answering their questions. So on both in the mornings and the afternoons. In Amposta, very often people work from 9 to 1, and then there's a break until 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which is terrible, and then we work till 7:30 or 8. That's the usual working hours people have. But of course, schools end at 4:30. So there is a total lack of synchronicity between the timetables that children have and families have. And if people had a job, well, they found that if they finished work at 1 and they went home for lunch, then they didn't have time to go to do whatever they needed to do in social services. And of course, we were only open from 8 to 3, but from 2 to 3 we would not be able to assist citizens. So that was really very inconvenient. But with our change in working hours, that's now a thing of the past. We offer from up to 6 o'clock in the afternoon our services. And since COVID, there's been teleworking. You know that during COVID, everyone had to work from home, but now we continue doing that one morning a week. And so you can focus on more administrative tasks, and then afterwards we work in a presential manner. But I think I already told you this. But anyway, another thing we do is that we don't always work at our offices in the actual building. We often go to people's homes, and we also optimize the use of space. Of course, our services now are quite large. They've grown a lot. There's not space for everybody in the office. We have 6 offices and a large co-working space also. And the fact that people can start working in the morning at different times, and then when you work outside the office, that means that there is space for everybody. Something that works very well, because if not, it's hard to organize themselves, is that people always need a prior appointment in order to come in to talk to us, so that they can choose the time slot that fits better in the needs. And well, another thing that I was doubting about was this was best practice, as I said at the beginning, was that in the rest of the council, these changes have not been made because people are used to working from 8 to 3, which may be very convenient or not, or depends. And some people, when they've heard this proposal about working from 8 to 6, they found it as a loss of rights. But we think it's a good way of being able to spend some time with our families. At lunchtime, mothers and fathers, usually mothers, because there's only a couple of fathers who do this, but a lot of the mothers can go home, have lunch with their children, and then go back to work, and that's fine. And there's also people who prefer to have a more compact timetable, and they have a shorter break for lunch, and they can leave earlier. So it's like a time schedule that is tailored to each of the workers, and it also improves the quality of the service that we offer. Thank you very much, Ms. Ferrer, for showing this best practice here from the Council of Amposta. And thank you also for overcoming all the hurdles to get here this morning. I'm really glad that you managed to get here. So we've seen examples of best practices of use of time from different city councils, Santa Coloma, Gramenet, and also from Amposta. But what happens in the private sectors? What can be done in the companies in order to make working and the use of time easier in the private sector? And for that, we'll be listening to Mr. Ejarque Guillamat. He's from SECOT, responsible for working relation. He's going to present a project called Time Capsules. Now, what is that about? Well, good morning to all of you. Thank you for inviting me. I don't know if there'll be time for questions afterwards or what. Well, that depends on time. Okay, it depends on time. So that's what happens in these sessions. Okay, so I'll try to go as quickly as possible so we have some time. I'm from SECOT, which is a business organization that has headquarters in Terrassa and also in Barcelona. This evening we have a session, a meeting here in Barcelona. We have been working on different projects for many years now around the equal opportunities and obviously also on time management, and answering the question that you asked, what the companies do. Well, as you know, there are many different types of companies, but what we do, and a bit along the lines of what our colleagues have just said, very often how much people can work has to do with time management. So I'd like to highlight the project I just mentioned, which is Time Capsules, which is an awareness-raising project that we worked on together with the Catalan government in order to improve people's awareness around the hours you spend working. We find that in our type of companies, in our group of associates, usually SMEs, a lot of self-employed workers. I'll talk more about self-employed workers later on because they're a small, very specific case. We try to have measures that allow us to manage time in a more reasonable manner. And very often these small companies find it as very difficult, as a kind of tax sometimes even. So we try to raise awareness, and with a series of audiovisual capture small videos, we work on co-responsibility, flexible timetables, teleworking, training during working hours, better management of time. So anyway, this is a long-term project, and we try to get SMEs to get used to new ways of managing working time. And before I was talking about this with some colleagues here, we have what we call our Equality Office that brings together all these gender-based initiatives, but also other initiatives that has a more cross-cutting perspective. And we talk about gender, about work-life balance, working hours, and so on. And at our office, what we offer is training, accompanying the companies, and help them sometimes really foster their projects, and sometimes make them aware of other things they could be doing but they're not doing. Obviously, each case is very unique. You can't have one recipe for all, because you may have a small car workshop, you may have a shop or whatever. So it's very different for each of the cases, and you can't just incorporate all the same measures in all companies. In theory, maybe you could, but when you actually land on the ground, you realize you can't. Well, I know that we are going a bit short for time, so I would like to simply talk about self-employed people now. We carried out a study on how self-employed people manage time. And it is true there's a lot of diversity in SMEs. Now, if you look at self-employed workers, that is even more spectacular. You talk about time management and they stare at you as if you were an alien, what you're talking about. So all these measures that you are proposing are not just complicated for self-employed workers to implement, but practically impossible. And I say that because when we try to launch measures for time management, very often we forget about self-employed workers, and they say, well, how can you talk about flexible working times if I have to work on weekends? So these are things that we also have to take into account, because very often they propose these measures for all companies, but they're really hard for self-employed workers to incorporate. In any case, in our group of companies, we are committed to time management measures. Of course, it has to be like that. It's something that really is of concern to us, especially because nowadays it's not just the fact that the younger generations have very clear ideas about that, but also the older generations are claiming for better use of time. And that's why from our organizations, what we're asking is to make sure that the impact is as soft as possible. We try to find ways of accompanying companies, trying to make things fit in for them also, because you can't just go across the board and apply the same thing to a 400 person company or a small company, and depends also on each of the sectors. So we are really working on how to manage the use of time. And I know that very often we have to convey different messages for the different types of companies. Okay, just ask me a question. So from the company's perspective, what would be a good solution for these SMEs and for self-employed workers so they can manage their hours well? Well, we'll ask them to call us and we'll make a tailor-made solution for them. It's not that I'm trying to avoid that question. The thing is that we can't just offer one single answer. For example, if a car workshop phones us up or a mechanical workshop, it says, well, how can you talk about teleworking? We can't telework. And then often we get reactions that are a bit that go a bit against what we often, because they sort of get the impression that we've no idea what we're talking about. But other companies, however, think, oh yes, if we found ways, for instance, of incorporating teleworking, and it's worked very well. So I say, that's why I said, well, call us. But it's true that obviously we're all committed to this new way of managing time, but you have to make it as tailor-made as possible. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, because I don't have one answer that will fit for all. But we do have to try to adapt to the reality of each situation. So thank you very much. That's been very clear. Good. Yes, you can clap, of course. Now, we've heard from the public administration. We also heard from the company sphere, small and medium-sized companies. And there's also another sector that's worked very much on these issues, which is the third social sector. We're going to hear from Julia Vigo, Head of Equality and Feminism at the Third Sector Board, and also Marta Campo, who works on strengthening policies at the Third Social Sector Board. Thank you very much, and thank you for the Time Use Week and for the Department for giving us the opportunity to talk a bit about the process. We're going to talk about especially the internal processes that we have in our organization, which is the Third Social Sector Board, and so it can serve as a kind of mirror for the rest of our organizations. First of all, I'll very briefly to talk about our board. I don't know if all of you know our board. It's a third level board. That means it's a platform of federations. So these are entities that bring together other entities. Right now, there are 37 federations, all working in the social sphere and not-for-profit. And of these 37 associations, in turn, incorporate over 3,000 organizations in our territory. So we always have look at two levels. On the one hand, to represent the sector, the interests, the positioning, and they want to improve when it comes to creating social policies. But also, on the other hand, there's another aspect, which is strengthening our sector itself, because we'll never be able to represent our sector sufficiently if we're not as strong powerful sector. And then we also have to look at our team itself. Our team has grown very much over the past year, and with this growth, two things have happened. On the one hand, there's one thing that was already of concern of the people who'd been in the board for quite a long time, which is the whole aspect of caring for us. And then there's also the fact that in our team we have tripled. So we had this common ground of caregiving. And why is this linked to the right to time? Because on the one hand, it looks at time from a twofold perspective. On the one hand, the time that each of us dedicate within our organization, and also the well-being itself of the organization. So taking it to the ground of time, we have to look not just on how we organize time, but also the quality of the time that we have when we are within our professional spheres. And it was with this in mind that we led an internal process which has led to an operational plan for caregiving, and we've carried out a whole series of processes which for us is really important, that integrate this perspective of the right to time, but always take into account a caring and this feminist and intersectional perspective. Hello, can you hear me? Thank you, Julia. Thank you to all of you. It's fantastic to be here. And along the lines of what Julia's just said, we started our internal process, but of course we have to be very careful and take into account this diversity that we heard about in the company sphere, but we also have it in within our organizations. We try to offer something that can serve to all the diversity of organizations that we represent, apart from our internal processes. Our internal process started with a stock taking, first of all, as Julia says, a change of paradigm and a change of the way we approach things, the context, the way that we look at the world. But there's also an internal change. Many of us are mothers, and of course we want to have time for our families. We want to be able to spend time with our children and time for ourselves too. So at an internal level, when we decided to organize in this way and to question what we're doing, we started a whole process of reflection. We set up a committee for caregiving and a plan also. So we looked at how we convened our meetings, how we accompanied people who started working in an organization, and make things more systematic. Of course, making things more systematic means investing time, of course, but afterwards, we have the fruit of that time that we invested in the future. So we had to spend some time on tidying things up a bit, because that's going to lead to everyone saving time afterwards. And we also leave time for caring within in our team. So we also spend time on caring for each other, because that means that we can be more efficient afterwards and we communicate much better with our colleagues. And we always have to bear in mind that we represent other organizations that are very diverse, and where everything we do can then hopefully be transferred to them. And then another thing that we've been doing within our plan was to take into account the prevention and reaction when we find ourselves in non-desirable situations. So we have an anti-harassment protocol, sexual harassment, and we also have a committee for that, with members of the board and also of different organizations and entities, and also people from the technical team. And what Julia was just saying, that we want to serve as a mirror. We generate space to talk about time and to get to know the federations that we represent and see how what we are doing could be useful for them, apart from for us also. And in this sense, as I said, we created the anti-harassment committee, we got our protocol, we set a commission, and we have a whole timeline of everything that's been done, and that allows us to look back, see what's worked, what hasn't worked, who's helped us, why they've helped us, and we'll be able to share that information with the organizations. And another thing that has emerged from our plan is our feminist plan, which Julia is going to talk more about now. Just a second. Okay. We seem to have a problem with the microphone. Yes, that's better. Okay, solved. All right. As Marta was saying, with our care plan, we have organized a series of processes which are and looked at the priorities for us. We have our feminist transformation plan, which at first started out as an equality plan, but then we thought, why not apply this cross-cutting feminist perspective that I mentioned at the beginning, open up our eyes and not just stay at the more formal level, but try to include the whole diversity that we have or sometimes do not have sufficiently represented within our organizations. And with our feminist transformation plan, we have 8 pillars, which I'll very briefly talk about. And so it includes the culture of organization, working in networks, representation at a horizontal vertical perspective, the payment policy, the balance between work and life, health, well-being, and also health and safety at work. And as Marta said, we also take into account violence against women within the workplace. And that allows us to work at an internal transformation level and also to serve as a mirror. And it means that there is an investment of time, but we do that fully convinced that it's going to lead to an organizational change that will be of benefit to everybody. I think we also need to go back to the logic of caring for others, because that's shown us that 2 things are essential for the transformation of the organization. On the one hand, to create a culture, and the other hand, create a structure. So we want to have both of these pillars. Not just do we want to have informal space for care, giving, have time to ask each other how we are before a meeting, before participating in a talk, but also to creating logical, formal spaces that allow us to reflect all these aspects. So some examples of the measures that we will have implemented when we have our feminist plan on way, which may have an impact on time. We, on the one hand, defining the job positions. Why is that important, taking into account time? Because it also allows us to recognize reproductive tasks which don't belong to anybody, but it always befalls the same people, so women, and we need to recognize these tasks and share them out appropriately between everybody. And then also being clear when it comes to the need for spaces for negotiation, also digital disconnection, and also the use of time. This needs to be revised periodically and fairly, and then time as an indicator of health and safety at work. How many of us have in a structural and repetitive manner had to been overburdened with different tasks and efforts? So we need to also focus on good health and safety at work. So I think that's just about it, and we just say a few final words. Thank you, Julia. Julia's mentioned some of the actions, and I'll just like to mention a couple more, and then we'll move on to the conclusions. One of the other things that we do, which is part of our feminist transformation plan, is our training plan. Because if we are not able to recognize these situations, we won't be able to work on them. So there's a whole empowerment and accompanying process and empathy that has to be included there amongst ourselves. So we need training at an emotional level, emotional consciousness, how to manage conflict, how to talk to others, and everything that she said about how to represent ourselves in a vertical and horizontal leadership, shared leadership. Of course, an organization has been around for a long time. We have our ways of working, and that means we also have our own doubts. We need to manage these situations, but if there is a will, I think there will be ways of finding out how to do that. And then we'll also have a digital disconnection plan, which we are working on already.
And so we'll start sharing this with the organizations, with the Equality and Improvement Group, whose first meeting will be held on the 24th. Now we're running slightly late, so very, very briefly, I have 3 ideas to wind up. And they're based, or they have to do with the twofold perspective, so an internal process, but also an outward look. That's for work, but also for caregiving, culture and structure, and time. a twofold perspective, a quantity but also quality. Thank you.
Els agraeixo.
Thank you for your good time management. We actually have 3 or 4 minutes left for questions from the floor, or maybe questions amongst you. If you have any questions, now is a good time to ask them. Ask about any of these good practices that have been shared. There's a question here from the second row. Could we have the handheld mic so that we can hear the question? Go ahead. Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask you what your specific proposal is in terms of working day, the number of hours, or the hours rather. Who is the question for anyone specific? Well, everybody addressed it, Sekot, Cristina, Nuria. Well, do we have one volunteer to answer this question about working hours organization? Maybe Mr. Jarque would like to answer this question, perhaps. Yes, please put your microphone on. Well, I'm not sure whether I feel like answering the question, but whatever. Earlier on, there's something that I said, something we really believe in. Negotiation, agreements. It's not about what I feel like or what somebody else feels like or what companies feel like. As we always like to say, companies or businesses are everybody, both the entrepreneur and the people working for the company. And as I said earlier, there's so much diversity that I can't really give you a figure. If I gave you a figure, some people would applaud and other people wouldn't, but that's not the point. The idea is to reach an agreement with some kind of common horizon. We shouldn't allow this hurdle to impede our addressing the matter, but we need to acknowledge diversity and try to figure something out. Clearly, the general trend is towards lower working hours. Since that is the trend, we all agree that that is the way we should be heading. So in that context, we need to reach agreements with all the necessary modulations and approaches. And of course, we will be there to negotiate these matters because we are amongst the players that are stakeholders that have something to say about it. Can I speak as well? Yes. I just wanted to say that taking diversity into account, that's better in terms of sound, yeah. Well, taking diversity into account, school hours should be adapted to working hours. I mean, if the children leave school at 4:30 p.m., we can't have a situation where parents are still working until 8:30. And so they have extracurricular or after-school activities on a compulsory basis so that, they have music until, say, 9 p.m. because otherwise there's no way to care for them. So, yeah, I mean, we set things up with parent-teacher associations and other associations, but it's just not right for children to be finishing their own day at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. I mean, 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. is very late. If you have to do shopping, for instance, you might have some time at midday to do some shopping, but it's really a significant loss in quality of life. So I really support shortening working hours. I live in a rural area. I mean, when I was little, people went out very early to work in the fields, and then they would go home after lunch, and that was a time for rest and sharing. Now, that has changed. We're no longer getting up so early to go work in the fields. There's something else I wanted to say that I forgot to mention. We changed the hours of our cultural activities in Amposta. That works very well on weekends, but on weekdays we can't have activities at 6 or 7 p.m. because people are working. And so it would be nice to shorten working hours, but that would require everybody to make the change, including shops, including small businesses. Thank you very much. We can now bring this session to a close. We'd like to thank you all for your contributions. for sharing these good practices. Let's thank them, please, with a good round of applause. Thank you, and see you next time. I hope everything will go well. And we don't have much of a break now because we will follow this gathering with a description of research. We will have more speakers telling us about how time use is tackled on the ground, with concrete examples that can be implemented in daily life in order to better manage our uses of time. We've heard from Santa Coloma de Gramenet, which with its babysitting service, something that is so difficult as having, as caring for children. But this really makes time use more affordable for women, because we all find time and again that poor time use and time poverty is something that most significantly affects women. So projects such as this one in Santa Coloma de Gramenet are of great interest. It was also interesting to hear from Ms. Nuria Farres of the Amposta Town Council that changed the social work hours in Amposta so that the employees' hours would be more flexible, but also so that by expanding the opening hours, recipients and clients would find it easier to access the services. And there's a key word that has come up here: remote working, teleworking. One of the few good things the pandemic left, the ability to consolidate remote working as a good way to manage and rationalize and streamline our uses of time. That is one other good example shared by the Amposta Town Council. But in counterpoint to what public bodies, public authorities, public employers can do, there is a contrast with what private businesses can do. So Mr. Jarque of SECOT told us about what small businesses and self-employed people are able to do. At that level, it's much more difficult to implement good time use. Small companies with few employees find it difficult. It was also very interesting to hear about caregiving from the third sector, as well as the Feminist Transformation Initiative, because, as usual, all of these problems have a female face on them. So we are going to continue hearing about further good practices. In this case, the presenters will be researchers, or will be focusing on research. So we now begin the Catalan meeting on research, or meeting on Catalan research on time use. So we will now ask Lidon Gasull to join us. She is the director of AFAC, the Association of Students and Families of Catalonia. Can you please come up to the stage? I would also like to ask Ms. Eva Gajarro to join us. She is the Secretary for Training at UGT. We would like to ask all of the speakers to be ready to step up. That way we can start soon. And we won't have to slow down the session, and we can keep up our pace while they're being mic'd up. They will be joined by Julia Quintana. She is an analyst at Evalua. She will be presenting a study on needs assessment and care in Catalonia. She has, all the speakers so far have talked about time and the caregiving requirements that it entails. We will also hear from Adriana Gil Juarez, Associate Professor at the Department of Basic Developmental and Educational Psychology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Our speakers ready and mic'd up. Please, Ms. Lidon Gasull, Ms. Eva Guijarro, Ms. Julia Quintana, and Ms. Adriana Gil Juarez. Please come and join us here on the stage. Thank you and welcome. Good morning. Welcome. We can begin, or perhaps we can continue discussing how research is moving forward regarding this. We'll start with Ms. Lidón Gasul, who is the director of AFAC. How do I move the slides? I can do that for you if you like, up to you. It's on the screen. Do you want us to skip you? Well, I just didn't know how to get started. Okay, then we'll skip you. Go on to Ms. Eva Gajardo. Yes, I'm ready. My name is Eva Maria Gajardo Rodriguez, Gajardo. I'm here on behalf of Dolores Bassa, who was unable to come. I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers for inviting us. I'm going to be sharing with you a report commissioned by UGT in Catalonia with the support of the Department for Equality and Feminism via our Service for Training and Development. So here's our report. This is an analysis of the equality plans that are collected in our RegCon. We'll be using weird acronyms such as RegCon and PNIs, but I mean, we'll explain what they mean as we introduce them. The regulatory framework in 2019 was very strict regarding equality plans. According to the law in 2007, any companies with over 200 employees should have an equality plan. And then in 2019, also fleshed out into further royal decrees, any companies with over 50 employees need to have an equality plan. And the regulations also set out in great detail what form these equality plans should take. So we've got legislation that implements the rules. There is a Royal Decree 902 of 2020 and then 901. One is for equality of pay and the other one is for equality plans. So we have a collection of all the equality plans that have been registered in the relevant register, RegCon, with all of their contents. This report is far more comprehensive than what I can share with you today. We carried out a quantitative and qualitative analysis of these plans. Quantitative analysis. Our quantitative analysis concerns the RegCom register. It is a register of collective bargaining agreements and equality plans. It's a public register, so anyone can look it up. We took a representative sample for the years 2021 through 2023, and we found that the classification used for equality plans is done through the Catalan classification of business activities. Now, this classification did not allow us the kind of analysis that we wanted to carry out. So we had a problem with this register. These registers were really designed for collective bargaining agreements. They were not designed for equality plans, but at least we had something. So beyond that, we found that other data were needed. And so we did our qualitative research. We took a representative sample. We sampled the types of measures and their content. What are the items and measures included in equality plans? Access to employment, working conditions, pay, organizational culture and management, professional development or career development, reorganization of time. Look at that. We're talking about equality plans, and reorganization of working hours is one of the key items. And then there is also occupational health and safety, which is also a really important point. If we look at the percentage of measures, access to employment is taken as the 100% reference. That has to be there all the time. So 90% include career development, but the number 3 item is reorganization of working hours, of working time. So this is really important. After that, we have very important other aspects, such as pay. We always say pay is important, but we have found that organization of working hours is especially important, is highly important. So we find that reorganization of working hours enables work-life balance, and clearly there is growing awareness of this amongst the general citizenry and amongst companies as well. And so companies realize that they need to implement measures to reorganize and bring in a greater balance. As our colleagues were saying earlier, it's very important to promote co-responsibility, shared responsibility between the genders, because otherwise gender stereotypes and other gender factors lead to women bearing the lion's share of the burden. So looking at working hours and co-responsibility in Catalonia, on the one hand, we have the gradual rollout of equality policies, and we can see that the kind of support provided is very unequal. For instance, in 2019, 72.35% of parental leave and 93% of reduced working hours for caregiving purposes were applied for by women. Management staff in companies make very little use of such measures. And of course, this limits their ability to influence matters because they are, of course, used as models to be, and examples to be followed. Demanding a lot or too much of women has an impact on the wage gap, on their opportunities for promotion and career development, and as well as their psychosocial health risks. And there are particular groups who are working on working hours that are really, really counter to work-life balance. And so it's important to have policies that value shared responsibility or co-responsibility and promote it. What are the features that they should include? Well, flexible working hours and reduced working hours without being overly conditioned by the need to care for children up to 14. Extended breastfeeding leave for single-parent families, that's also an important component. New situations within existing leave arrangements. The situation now is different from what it was in the past. So, for instance, medical tests and fertility treatments are also a need for leave, as well as adaptation of measures to new kinds of families. And then there is also the matter of leave for gestational mourning, as well as flexible working hours for menstruation or climacterium, or and so we need measures and we need actions. I don't know how we're doing for time. Poorly, I'm afraid. You should wind up. Well, yes, I should wind up, but I think it's also important to learn about the conclusions. In terms of general objectives, I would like to encourage you to check the report in our website, and I can also make these slides available to the organizers in case anybody's interested in downloading them. So, general objectives. Organization of shifts and access to tasks, promotion of work-life balance, identification of needs and facilitation to achieve those needs, improved co-responsibility. This is essential in the 21st century. If responsibility is not shared by men and women, we're never going to get anywhere. The tasks of care are everyone's responsibility. And then we have adaptation of working hours and flexibility as long as it is conducive to work-life balance. So we have time-related measures and work-life balance measures, meetings to identify new strategies. We're talking about equality, we're talking about the actuality of business life, of company life. It's important to experience firsthand what is going on in the company. There is a need for transparency and for choices. Not everybody strikes the same work-life balance because not everybody has the same needs. So we need this kind of flexibility as well. It's important to have intelligent management of human resources. That is also crucial. Sometimes sick leave is caused by the need to have work-life balance. We need to be aware of what is going on in our companies. There are also co-responsibility measures. Please come to your conclusion. We need to hear from everybody, and we need to respect other people's time as well. Please. Okay, thank you very much. In terms of actions, well, reorganization of tasks and functional opportunities, naming of a work-life balance agent or person in charge, promotion of flexible working hours, and information about time management and labor rights. Thank you very much. Thank you, and apologies. And now we will be hearing about a study carried out in schools over the very, very heated debate regarding school hours. Ms. Lidonga-Sul has the floor. Thank you very much for inviting us for the second year running to this event. We carried out a study on how school hours in Catalonia impact different spheres. Today I will be focusing on work-life balance and gender equality. I couldn't possibly address the whole study. The debate on school hours is a very complex one. Our study does not solve everything, but what it does do is identify the fact that we need to change school hours in order to adapt them to the need for work-life balance and gender equality. Our work, our research was intersectional and in-depth. The aim is to improve quality of education while analyzing the impact of school hours on student development, family organization, and social dynamics that revolve around children's schooling. In an earlier session, there was mention of the need to adapt school hours to the needs of families and workers. This study does not overlook the fact that the kind of school hours that we need have to be part of an overall comprehensive working hours review. We need a comprehensive reform that includes both school hours but also employment legislation to facilitate work-life balance, We need mechanisms that change school hours, but do not endanger the right to education of children or other rights that they have, particularly in more vulnerable groups. And we need to avoid having an impact on a negative impact on dropout rate, school segregation, and family dynamics. In case you're not aware of the general system in public education in Catalonia, there are 3 kinds of school hours. In primary school, until the age of 12, and preschool and primary school, generally there are split school hours or continuous work hours, but continuous school hours are only in 25 schools. So generally speaking, schools have split school hours. So students start their school day between 8:30 and 9. They have a mid-morning break, and then they go back to class. Then they have a lunch break, and after the lunch break, they have further classes. The continuous school hours start from 8 or 8:30 to 9. There's a mid-morning break, and then classes continue without a break until 2 or 2:30, depending on the school level, primary, secondary. And then there are mixed school hours, but only in secondary schooling. In this case, there are 3 split-hour days, where there is a break at lunchtime, and 2 continuous school days, starting in the morning and then continuing until a late lunch hour. From a systems perspective, we feel that time uses can only be analyzed, cannot be analyzed only from the educational perspective. There are different social dimensions that come into play. So we need to look at what's going on around us to identify the strategies and changes we need to implement. We're talking about gender imbalance, and so it's important to be aware of certain figures that will help us gauge the impact of different school hours in Catalonia. The employment rate in Catalonia is over 57.5%, over 57%, but it's important to see the breakdown. Over 86% of employed people are working full-time. Men work full-time, 92% of men work full-time, 80% of women are working full-time. That's a difference of 12.4 percentage points. As to part-time work, 7.8% of men have part-time work, 20.2% of women have part-time work. So you can clearly see who is working shorter hours at work, and so we'll see what they're doing with those shorter working hours. Now, looking at part-time work devoted to caregiving, it applies to 3.5% of men and 17.3% of women. Negotiating power to achieve a more flexible working hours. Men have a greater ability to negotiate their working hours, 35% versus 29% of women. As to time devoted to daily care for children or grandchildren, women are devoting more than twice as much time, or twice as much time. So if we look at the impact of policies, we have to consider this baseline situation.
Now, very briefly, in this study, what we tried was to take a look at all these issues from the perspective of experts, also with surveys and open questionnaires to teachers and teaching departments in Catalonia, and also to the families to see what their opinions were. And I'll just very briefly tell you that we're now working on the second half of our study. So we're trying to gather the opinion also of students to see how school hours have impacted them. So just a few conclusions of our report. What we found is that families that have continuous school hours, that they have to try, it's very relevant for them, but we can't extend this to everyone because only in primary school we just have 25 schools that have this type of continuous working hours. And something we've concluded from this is that 70% of the families who have children in preschool and primary school with a split work school hours, they have voluntarily chosen this type of school because it fits their working hours better and their family times better. So it's true that the results of the study show that especially in preschool and primary school, work-life balance has a lower impact on the families that have decided to choose this type of schools with continuous school hours. But as I say, there are only 25 schools of this type, and people have chosen the schools probably because of the times, and we have to look at the reality and the situations of each of these families. But obviously, this is not continuous school hours is not a solution to families who work a split working hours. In this case, there is a huge impact when it comes to find a balance between work and life, and both in primary school and secondary school also. We also seen that over half of the families in the upper half of primary school that have a split school hours need support to pick up children from schools. And in some cases, if we do have a split school hours, it would make it easier for them to pick them up just once a day. And also, families that have split school hours have to pay more in order to cover for the needs they have when it comes to picking up children. But however, school hours currently do not lead to an affordable situation for most families. For those families that both the ones that go to split school hours and the continuous school hours, in both cases, the cost of the babysitting hours before school or for the lunch breaks and also the after-school activities have a very high cost. What experts tell us is that those children that need to be taken care of both before, during the lunch break and also after school, which allows people to be able to cover those times. But if there is a support for covering those activities, and that would lower inequality. But there are usually families who work full-time, and very often people also have to work in the afternoons. And therefore, if there is this continuous school time, women may have to stop working at an earlier time during the day, or they may even have to give up their jobs, and that reinforces gender stereotypes. And an important conclusion is if in secondary school, these mothers, if they haven't kept up with their professional lives in a stable manner, what very often happens is that once secondary school is over, mothers have a much lower possibility of going back to their jobs afterwards. And also on the basis of the research on inclusive education, we see that this is something that has an even greater impact on mothers that have children who have special needs. They usually have to give up their jobs to look after their kids. And if they have continuous working hours, it means that there is even less time for them to be able to do anything other than care for their children. And that's also a huge financial burden. Another conclusion in our report is that, first of all, the change of paradigm when it comes to the use of time, that cannot be solved simply changing the educational system. That's really important. And I'm sure that this week this will be mentioned once and again. Secondly, we also need to be able to organize school hours, take into account the needs of all the students, and also the work-life balance of the families, and with the whole diversity of families that we have, we've seen that in both cases there are aspects which are not working well, both with continuous and split timetables. Of course, school luncheons is something that's key, and we have to take that into also in secondary school, and also think about students that have special needs. And education also is always important, and to have financial support in order to help families that need extra support. So we need to always have this inclusive perspective, think about the educational needs, have the right teachers in order to address special needs for children, and also see how the care can be shared out amongst the members of the families, and taking always the gender perspective into account. This is just a very brief overview of our study, but if you need, and if you're interested, you can see the whole study here in this QR code, and you can also, of course, send any comments to us if you wish. Thank you very much.
I passem la paraula.
Thank you very much, Ms. Joshua. We're now going to Ms. Julia Quintana from Ivalua, who's going to talk about the need for care in Catalonia. And I'll please ask you to be very brief and concrete. Thank you very much, first of all, to Time Youth Week for the invitation. I'm Julia. I come from the Catalan Institute of Assessment of Public Policies, Ivalua. We are an evidence-based organization. We work for the public administration, especially for the Generalitat of Catalonia. And today I'm going to show the key conclusions of our assessment of needs for caregiving in Catalonia, together with my colleague Cristina Ferrer, and also Sandra Esquerra and Crystal Kerr from the UNESCO chair and the University of Vic. So very briefly, this was a commission of the Director General for Care for Time, Organization and Equity, and the Secretary General for Feminisms. We wanted to see what was the need of care in order to reduce time poverty, and they asked us to assess what the situation is, what are the needs, what are the resources, and what can we do in order to solve some of the problems that we have. So that's what we tried to do. First of all, we defined what the need for care is. It's very obvious, or at least at first glance, but it's very hard to move forward if you don't have a good definition. So we base ourselves on a very general definition. So often we think about the elderly when we talk about care, but we're looking more at care for others in a more general manner when there is vulnerability of human beings, and there's universal needs that have to be looked after in order to make life feasible. Sometimes these are physical needs, so physical, physiological needs, but there's also emotional needs that need to be covered. Everything has to do with the psychological and the emotional well-being of people. And as we can see here, our physical and emotional needs can change over a person's life cycle. Physical needs, for instance, in children, very high in when it comes to 0 to 3 years of age, and of course the older the child gets, the lower they go. But emotional needs are always very high, both for young children and also teenagers. So teenagers also need a lot of care in this sense, in the emotional perspective. And when it comes to the adulthood, needs, both physical and emotional, are usually lower, except if you have a disease or sometimes issue of mental health. But of course, we do have a case of special needs, and these rise. And then when you get older, traditionally, this is what we think of when we talk about caregiving. So between the 65, 75 years of age, there's a growth in the needs, especially the emotional ones, not so much physical ones. But when you get to an age of 75 to 80, then we have a high demand for both physical and emotional needs to be covered. So this is, and of course, you have the aspects of gender, of social class, territory, and so on. These are all aspects that have to be taken into account. But this shows you a general overview of the needs of each of these stages. So on the basis of that, we used the Catalonia Health Survey and also the census of Catalonia, and looking at the territory and how it was organized according to social class and the gender, we looked at the prevalence for the need for physical care according to different age groups. Maybe it's a bit difficult to understand what you see in the slide, but basically almost 30% of Catalans need physical care, so they have difficulties with their everyday activities. When in the case of children, there's 100% that need support, and that in total is 49% of people that need care. The other 33% are adults between 15 to 75 years of age. And then when the elderly is only, quote unquote, 18% of cares. So there's a much greater need for care when you are older, but of course, we have a very diverse population that need cares, not just the elderly, but also children and adults. And that has to be taken into account. We've tried to break this down at the level of each municipality. So there's an index that shows you what proportion of the people in your town or village need help. And you see we have different slots here between 15 to 40%. And according to this table, we can see whether in your area the group that needs more support is either the children or the adults or the elderly, and that helps municipalities see what kind of programs they need to support. When it comes to emotional needs, of course, there's a lot of information lacking in this slide. In fact, there's very little information available. With all the registries and so on, we have seen that boys and girls up between 4 and 14, emotional aspects have a great impact. It affects up to 7.4%. There is a growth in mental health issues since the pandemic, especially. And with adults and the elderly, there's a 22% of the population affected. And once again, there is a huge impact here of gender and the elderly. So women and the elderly are the ones that have most mental health issues. So this helps us define the problem. When it comes to what is offered, very often, as we often hear from the feminist perspective, there's 4 spheres, which is the community, the market, the family, and the public sector. So in Catalonia and Spain, there's a lot of weight placed on the family, and the public sector is quite weak in this sense and acts more in a complementary fashion. So now let's take a look at what the family does and what the public sector does in order to respond to its needs. Now we've already heard a lot of data from my colleagues and other speakers. Families, as we help, has an impact on the working and productivity figures. Women very often have part-time jobs because they have to take care of others, and women often work double or twice as many hours a week taking care of people, 13 hours a week compared to men that just spend 7 hours. And then it also has a lot to do with the class origin and so on, because women that have a better financial situation can outsource this caregiving activity, but that's not the same for us. And also this depends on whether they are women or men. And then there's a public sector. Here there's huge differences. Women need practically 80% of those who take off work in order to look after their children, and it's 65% of non-professional caregivers. And these are cases in which there's some kind of support from the public sphere, and these leaves are not paid, and if they do receive any kind of money for taking care, is less than 700 or 800 euros a month. However, there is a growth in the number of men who take paternity leave. So there's practically 50% of people who take leave due to the newborn. So men sometimes take off to look after a child, but always when it's 100% paid by the company or by the Social Security. So in public services, we've seen that kindergartens is the main resource that we have in our territory. We've heard about a lot of municipal initiatives that are very interesting, but may not be available everywhere. But kindergartens or creches, the main resource that we have. So in the age group from 0 to 3 years of age, it only reaches 56% of children, 38% of public schools, and 18.2% of private kindergartens in this case. But there's a lot of differences according to the territory. So in urban areas or where there's a greater need, the coverage of kindergarten is lower, and there's also a higher presence of private kindergartens. That's what we can see. So we have on the one hand the kids who need it from 0 to 3 years of age, which are want to need it, and then you can see public kindergartens in blue and red in private. So you can see there's a lot of public schools and not so much private. When it comes to the elderly, there are different types of care homes for elderly. In the case of highly dependent people, practically 20% use one type of these services, but they also have non-professional caregivers. So once again, the public support is not enough in order to offload and take up the burden of the family. So what we found is that the existing public services do take care of very intense periods of sort of the very early ages and also the elderly, but there's a limited support, and there's really no support throughout life when there is other cases where you need support. There's no support in these cases for things that are unexpected, unless there may be some municipal support. So these resources are offered as a complement to families, and they do not manage to replace families. That has an important impact when it comes to poverty and time poverty also for women. And there's a lot of variability in the territory. So we have to think of a more articulated and across-the-board support system for everybody. Thank you very much, Canay, for your... Let's just have a round of applause.
Passem la paraula a l'Adriana.
And now I'll give the floor to Adriana Giljuez from the Psychology Department and Evolution Department of the Autonomous University of Barcelona. So you have the last few minutes to yourself. Thank you very much. Oops, what happened here? Okay, well, thank you very much for having invited me. Okay, we're seeing what we shouldn't be seeing. Oh, yes, now we do have a PowerPoint. Well, we always have technical issues. Anyway, our project is Gender Equitable Interactions Online. It's a European project that had as a goal to find out how video conferencing can help you maintain or to combat inequality in the workplace. So it's really interesting. 4 European countries participated in this: Germany, the UK, Spain, and Iceland, and 4 multinational companies. And we tried to see what's happening at the micro, meso, and macro level. Now I'm going to talk about study 2, which is the meso level in Spain, in particular. And we wanted to see what ideas there were about the different ways of working with video conferencing. So the methodology where we try to maximize demographic variability, but also representing all the different job positions within the company. So our starting point was the literature that we have on the distribution of responsibilities within the home and also in the workplace, and taking into account the gender and the impact it's had during the pandemic with people, women working from home, mothers working from home. And all these authors here tell us that after the pandemic, people do work more from home, but the home workload, as we've already heard, affects everybody, but it disproportionately affects women. although men are now carrying out more home tasks with teleworking and so on, but the ones that have stereotypes associated to them, such as cooking and washing clothes and so on, are still carried out by women. We also see there's a huge impact on mothers' mental health, especially of mothers who work. There is a huge older burden of them after the pandemic. And these large and exacerbated inequalities lead to a double burden just at a domestic level, at home level, and also in the workplace, especially for working mothers. Then Carson and others tell us, although there are many men who were committed to gender equality and who made use of teleworking in order to help, quote unquote, with a task at home, but this change is not a report. There's still many that consider that these responsibilities have nothing to do with them and they leave it in the hands of their partners. There's also a huge impact of the least favorable families in terms of finance and also in the workloads. Now, another interesting thing that Pereira talks about is that women who tend to be very perfectionist do even more in order to try to cover this double workload, and that leads to a lot of stress in their everyday lives. And these authors that you see here, Jaworski and et al., says that in spite of the fact that the pandemic showed that if we work from home would be very useful, but if there's no specific policies, no specific efforts made, gender roles will prevail and will be even strengthened with teleworking. So in this study that we mentioned, we wanted to see what these different common sense configurations were, people's perspectives about video conferencing. So we asked people to classify a series of statements taken out from the literature about video conferencing and the different actions associated with it. So we had a total of 59 statements. I'll just show 14 of these here. The ones which you see in black are the ones that are most strictly related to time. And then the other ones in green are the ones that have a weaker correlation. We found that there were 72 participants in our group, most of which were female with between 25 to 34 years of age. And we did a Victoria analysis with weighted averages, and we did a systematic analysis of the discourse in order to see what is common sense and what factors was it reflected here. Regarding the workplace, most of them work from home and been working with video conferencing for over 5 years. And when they answered that, they were thinking about meetings, average size meetings between 5 and 6 people, between 2 to 6 people, sorry. And we looked at their opinion and these video conferences, saw that they had a different way of seeing it, and that it had more impact on working with. For instance, the first factor, which is a totally positive perspective towards video conferencing, these people say that it lets them to organize their work in a flexible manner. It's easier to strike a work-life balance. It respects private life. It's a good way of managing their meetings and managing the teams. There's no anxiety in these meetings. And this type of common sense would be very useful for working women. But factor 2, we find that video conferences are good in general and preferable to a telephone meeting or face-to-face meeting. They're easier to access, and especially you don't have to worry so much about your physical appearance, how people see you. But even so, it's the rhythm of the meeting is somehow hindered and productivity does not improve at work. Ms. Kekla, I really have to ask you to go towards the conclusions because we're going to run out of time and we need a pause before the next one. So a specific conclusion. Well, as we have a series of other factors, as I said, the ones that are more transversal, but in general, that they say that it's not such an effective way of working. But the fourth factor, which you see there, says that video conferences may help, but they're not effective enough. And this also has an impact on private life. And these other factors here that, as you can see, number 5 is important because it focuses on interaction with others and instead of on productivity and efficiency. Number 7 says that it does not take into account time in one sense or the other. Simply looks at the positive and negative factors. And when it comes to the negative ones, we have harassment, we have power relationships, imbalances, and all the factors that traditionally concern us from the feminist research perspective. And then finally, there is a concern regarding the effectiveness. People think it do help them save time because it makes them more productive and they didn't have that productivity in the past. So our conclusion, as I say, we have 3 studies underway, but we cannot simply move from into a straight answer, yes, no, it's good or bad, I like it, I don't like it, helps me save time, or it doesn't help me save time, because these are very complex situations. We have to use common sense and look at the way we work. We have to listen to people specifically in each of the workplaces and see whether or not teleworking and video conferencing is going to help them or is going to be more of an obstacle more than anything else. So we need clear instructions in that sense. And we can't just do it any old way. Thank you very much. And we'd also like to thank our other 3 speakers very much. So we'll leave this session here. We'll take a very short 5-minute break before we have our opening session.